The meeting in London brought together leaders and representatives from across Europe and the transatlantic alliance with one focus: the current state of the war in Ukraine and the question of long-range capability. It was not the first time these leaders had gathered, but the tone had shifted. The war has moved into a stage defined by endurance. Both sides have adapted, both sides have suffered, and the battlefield has stretched in reach and complexity. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer opened the gathering of what has become known as the Coalition of the Willing, a group of nations that has committed political, military and economic support to Ukraine since Russia launched its full-scale invasion. Starmer's remarks were direct. He called on Western allies to supply Ukraine with longer-range weapons, arguing that Ukraine must be enabled not only to defend its territory, but to disrupt Russia's ability to wage war from deep within its own lines. The argument reflects a strategic calculation that a war of positions can only shift when one side gains new operational depth. Beside Starmer sat Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. His presence was a reminder of the human, political and military weight of this conflict. Zelensky has spent nearly 3 years gathering support, pressing world leaders to understand that Ukraine's survival continues to depend on external backing. The battlefield advancements of the first year, the intense counteroffensives and the stabilizations of defensive lines have all occurred under conditions shaped by Western supply. Also present was NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte, whose message aligned with a broader NATO concern that the trajectory of the conflict cannot be permitted to tilt in Russia's favor. Germany, represented by Foreign Minister Johann Wadephul of the CDU, came into the talks balancing internal political debates over weapons policy with its role as one of the largest single donors of military systems to Ukraine. The question of longer-range weapons dominated the session. Among the systems openly referenced were Tomahawk guided missiles, cruise missiles capable of striking high-value targets far from the front. These weapons, deployed in previous conflicts, have shaped modern understandings of long-range precision warfare. Their use in the Middle East and against ISIS showed the extent to which they can neutralize strategic targets, command infrastructure, and entrench defensive networks without requiring ground penetration. However, the political threshold for supplying such weapons to Ukraine remains high. Recently, Ukrainian President Zelensky raised the issue directly in Washington, seeking Tomahawks from the United States. But US President Donald Trump refused the request. The refusal did not end the debate. Instead, it shifted the center of discussion toward Europe. If the United States would not supply Tomahawks, the argument goes, could Europe step in with equivalent or alternative systems? French President Emmanuel Macron addressed the coalition by video link. Macron confirmed that France would increase its support. He announced that France would supply additional Aster air defense missiles to Ukraine, as well as what he described as new Mirage 2000 fighter jets. The delivery of Mirages signals not only a reinforcement of air capacity, but a continued willingness to place high-value defense assets directly into Ukrainian hands. Starmer used the London session to announce an acceleration in the production of Britain's own air defence missiles. Alongside this, the United Kingdom committed to supplying what it called light multi-purpose missiles, systems designed for flexible battlefield use, adaptable to mobile or static launchers, suitable for armoured, fixed or improvised positions. These are not long-range systems by the standards of cruise strike capability, but they represent incremental reinforcement of tactical combat options on the ground. The wider debate about long-range weapons is not purely technical, it is political. Long-range weapons carry implications for escalation. They have the capacity to strike targets across international borders. Some Western nations remain cautious that supplying such systems could be interpreted as enabling Ukraine to strike deep inside Russian territory. For others, this caution risks entrenching a strategic imbalance, allowing Russia to fire at Ukrainian cities, infrastructure and power systems with relative impunity, while Ukraine is expected to limit its responses to occupied territory or frontline areas. Zelensky has repeatedly argued that Russia's war effort relies on depth, logistical hubs far from the battlefield, air bases launching drone and missile attacks, and industrial production facilities supplying ammunition and replacement vehicles. Without the ability to strike these points, Ukraine remains locked in a defensive posture. As the meeting continued, the representatives listened to Macron's address, the leaders around the table taking notes and conferring quietly. Starmer restated a core position that has been echoed across Europe for nearly 2 years. that backing Ukraine is not simply a matter of solidarity, but of shaping the future security order in Europe. For the coalition, the war represents a contest over rules, borders, and the viability of international commitments. For Ukraine, it is a fight for national existence. The discussion returned to energy, the economic pillar of Russia's wartime resilience. Starmer said, "First, I think we should agree today to act to take Russian oil and gas off the global market." It was a call to reinforce sanctions not only in name, but in effect, closing the remaining loopholes that have allowed Russian energy to continue flowing through indirect markets. The statement underscored the belief that battlefield pressure must be matched with economic measures. Zelensky's remarks highlighted the impact of missile and drone strikes on Ukrainian cities. The winter months have historically brought intensified bombardment of energy infrastructure. For Ukraine, air defense remains a survival issue. Aster missiles and similar systems do not resolve the question of long-range strike, but they protect population centres, power stations and critical utilities. Macron's commitment was framed in that context. NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte focused on the durability of support. The coalition, he suggested, must plan not for months but for years. The war has entered a phase in which rapid breakthroughs are unlikely. Maintaining momentum requires reliable supply and shared burden. The logistical demands of sustaining Ukraine's defence continue to test storage, manufacturing capacity and political patience in multiple capitals. In Germany, weapon provision continues to meet both support and hesitation. Some factions argue that Germany must not be drawn into escalation. Others insist that Germany's role in European security requires decisiveness. The presence of Wade Full at this meeting signals that the internal German conversation is still active and consequential. Meanwhile, the question of US posture remains central. The refusal to supply Tomahawks reflects a broader recalibration in Washington. While the United States remains the largest single supplier of financial and military support to Ukraine, the degree and pace of assistance have shifted under the Trump administration. This dynamic places greater responsibility on European states to coordinate among themselves. The coalition of the willing intends to institutionalize this coordination, reducing reliance on Washington's decisions at critical moments. As the London discussions progressed, the atmosphere remained measured. These were not negotiations marked by sharp disagreement. Rather, they reflected strategic calculation, the alignment of political constraints with military needs. Each government represented faces its own domestic pressures, budgetary debates, public opinion, electoral cycles, and questions of defence industrial capacity. Outside the room, images of Tomahawk launches from past conflicts illustrate the capabilities under discussion. These scenes evoke the memory of previous operations where precision strike capacity shaped outcomes without direct ground confrontation. But in Ukraine, the context is different. Russia is not a non-state actor or a limited engagement adversary. It is a nuclear-armed power with entrenched defensive networks across occupied territory and within its national borders. Any shift in capability changes not only battlefield conditions, but geopolitical signalling. The United Kingdom's commitment to expand air defence missile production reflects recognition that ammunition and component shortages remain one of Ukraine's most pressing challenges. Air defence systems require continuous replenishment. Every intercepted missile or drone represents both protection and expenditure. The pace of Russian attacks demands sustained resupply, not episodic shipment. Macron's announcement of Mirage 2000 fighters adds a new layer. Supplying aircraft requires not only transfer of hardware, but preparation of pilots, maintenance crews, and logistical support. Such transfers are not immediate. They unfold over months, sometimes over years. But the signal is clear. European states are willing to deepen their defence relationship with Ukraine. Zelensky's position remains anchored in urgency. For Ukraine, time is not neutral. Every week of deliberation corresponds to events on the ground, territorial pressure, civilian casualties, damage to infrastructure. The coalition's discussions are therefore tied to a real-time battlefield dynamic. As the meeting drew to a close, Starmer reiterated his call for unity and decisive action. The coalition's purpose, he argued, is to ensure that Ukraine has what it needs to defend itself and that the principles at stake in this conflict, sovereignty, territorial integrity and the security order of Europe, are upheld. The outcomes of the meeting included concrete commitments, additional Aster air defence missiles from France, new Mirage 2000 fighter jets, increased British production of air defence systems, and delivery of light multi-purpose missiles from the United Kingdom. The question of tomahawks remains unresolved, with Europe now exploring alternatives. Beyond the specific systems discussed, the London session represented another point in an ongoing effort to maintain strategic alignment among Ukraine's supporters. The war continues, shaped by adaptation, attrition, and calculation. The coalition's decisions today will influence the battlefield months from now. The meeting conveyed a message that while the conflict enters a protracted stage, the commitment to Ukraine's defence remains active. For Ukraine, the support is essential. For Europe, it is strategic. For the international order, it is defining. The decisions made in rooms like this one will continue to shape the course of the war, the resilience of Ukraine, and the stability of the region for years to come.